Welcome to the Commonwealth Club of California and the Michelle Meow Show from the Commonwealth Club. Michelle and I are here at the Toby Family Auditorium at the otherwise almost deserted Commonwealth Club building in San Francisco. And we have a special guest who will be joining us today via Zoom teleconferencing. And you're, of course, all watching us online or listening to this podcast later on. If you're following us on YouTube Live, go ahead and submit any questions for our speaker today. I can't speak now. Use the chat feature, right next to the video window, and we'll try to work some of those into our conversation today. We have a lot to talk about, so we're very excited about it. Before I hand off to Michelle, I just want to note that at the Commonwealth Club, we are doing all of our programs live, online, without an audience, in person that is. So we're presenting these free. And if you would like to know what other programs we have coming up, go to commonwealthclub.org/online. We've got a lot of stuff there, and we're adding new stuff every day. And also, you can find out from at the same place how to help support us during this time. Now, I'm John Zipper. I'm the Commonwealth Club's Vice President of Media and Editorial, and one of my great treats in life is co-hosting Michelle Meow's programs here at the club. So now let's please welcome Ms. Michelle Meow.
Oh, thank you so much, John. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're joining for the first time, the Michelle Meow Show is your A through Z covering the LGBT, LMNOP, and everyone in between. We are so excited to have our special guest here with us today via Zoom. He is the first out gay elected teacher in San Francisco. He's a stand-up comedian, a politician, an activist, and a lot of other things, but today he's the author of his new memoir, Kiss My Gay Ass, My Trip Down the Yellow Brick Road Through Activism, Stand-Up, and Politics. Please welcome Tom Amiano. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hello there. Oh, I'm sorry. I just can't put this book down.
Hey, Tom, I decided that today I'm going to proclaim this day as Kiss My Gay Ass Day, or Tom Amiano Day. How about that?
I like it. I'll even waive my royalties. Maybe one of the gay virtual marches, parades, entertainment we do in June. We can say that's our slogan or something on that order.
Yeah, I think so. Hey, well, listen, I have something to share with you. While I was promoting this talk, I was also promoting a bunch of other stuff that was coming up, such as a program on abortion rights, a program on Lao Cambodian Thai New Year, and I got some feedback. There were people who were offended that I would include the cover of your book, Kiss My Gay Ass, with all these other speakers. And said, I don't have anything against the LGBTQ community, but I just think that that's offensive language, and so some of these other speakers shouldn't be grouped into the same platform. It's not appropriate. And I was so mad. I was so angry about it, and I wanted to respond, and I wanted to do this, and I wanted to tweet, and I wanted to call you, and and all this stuff. But then, because I really think that they should read the description of the book. But why don't we start there?
Sure.
Why did you title the book "Kiss My Gay Ass"?
Yeah. Well, it's something that people feeling what's appropriate or not appropriate. I'm very familiar with that, especially because comedy. When we first started, there was no out gay comics, no Marga, no Leah Delaria, and there were those who would come from the queer community and then walk out. They would be offended because they didn't think we should be not only out, but we shouldn't be critical of each other. And that's just what's going to happen. I mean, I think some of the people, and I think they're a minority, they're good people. They just need to put it in context. I can't tell them what they need to do. Not buying the book is fine if that's what it is. But it's just something that's very familiar.
No. But see, Kiss My Gay Ass, though, actually has some context and there's background to it. And you actually shouted these words and it's a beautiful story. Tell it. It involves Governor Governor Schwarzenegger.
Well, once a year, there's a big do at one of the big hotels, and it's all for the workers. It's all for rank and file membership and the Democratic Party and the whole Megillah. And so it's very sweet. Lots of people come. They look forward to it. Because they're in the trenches, and people get dressed up, and there's the great diversity of San Francisco. Every ethnicity, you hear every language, and it's very hoo-ha. The ballroom is with the chandeliers, and it's just and people are happy. So I don't know how this happened. I mean, in the book, I go into it in a little more detail. But somebody thought it'd be a good idea, Willie Brown, that Arnold Schwarzenegger happened to be staying there. And so they thought, wouldn't it be great if Arnold came to this dinner? Wrong. First of all, he had just vetoed a number of bills, including the gay marriage bill that Mark Leno had submitted. And he also had vetoed lots of labor bills, and that hurt people's pocketbook. So I thought it was really rude that he should come. And then all of a sudden he's on stage and started to joke around, and the crowd went nuts, and part of the crowd reaction was me going, "Kiss my gay ass." I was so insulted by the fact that he was there. And of course, we're all encouraging each other. We're talking 500-600 people, all it was like Les Miserables, so, all, and so that's that story. And then an adjunct to that is, most likely as a punishment, he vetoed a bill of mine that was really what we call a nothing burger. Even the Republicans that supported this bill had something to do with the port and financing. It really, it was very prosaic. And so he vetoed this bill, and it was very boilerplate. I'm not going to support this bill. And my staff was so smart. They looked at it, and they found an acrostic. And the first letter of every sentence, if you read it from the top to bottom, was IFUCKYOU. So that was the veto. That made a little history too. And of course, I said I refuse his offer and his veto. So there you are.
Well, Tom, you've been in the public eye, in the center of the public eye here in San Francisco for decades. Your book takes us way back to when you first got off the Greyhound bus into San Francisco. Why don't you kind of start there? Kind of like what changes were going through your life at that time, and did you have any idea that this was going to be your home for the rest of your life?
No, but I think there was something hidden that, I did know. I don't want to get all Dr. Phil here, but, I was anxious to get out of New Jersey. No reflection on my family and friends. But New Jersey can be very restricting, especially in the 50s, and you're a big fag. So I happened to read a magazine one time, and it said there was Turkish baths in San Francisco, and that known homosexuals went there. So I thought, well, sign me up. I was only 18 or 19. And at those days, it was politically incorrect, but what kids listened to were, instead of gaming, like today, was cops and robbers and cowboys and Indians. So I used to fantasize that I would leave home and go live on a ranch with Tab Hunter, and we would have cows and a buckboard, and of course Tab would always be wearing tighty whities. So that was one of my motivations for getting on the Greyhound bus and winding up in San Francisco, which immediate dislike. It was July, it was cold, it was damp. I was looking for Gidget, so it took quite an adjustment in the early days to really fall in love with the city like we all do.
You talk about getting into education and becoming an educator, kind of almost like you fell into the hole or the role, but I
Yeah.
particularly like you opening that up with the story of going to Vietnam during the Vietnam War, going to teach English, and when many people obviously would not go. Talk to us or shared that story and how you ended up in I think it was a water pot.
As a water
Yeah.
cistern above a toilet. Yes, I will.
Right. Right. Well, how would you like to do this? I can read a segment about Vietnam,
Okay.
uh, and I think it would kind of directly answer your question, except for, of course, where was my mind when I did it? I mean, that I understand. Okay. Let's see here. Pardon my voice. So in Vietnam, they called me Anh Tom. The letters TOM with a little hat accent over the letter O means shrimp in Vietnamese. So Mr. Tom, Anh Tom means little Tom, because the Vietnamese would always say to me, Mr. Tom, Americans are so fat and you're not fat. Why is that? There you are. The Tet Offensive happened in 1968. Right before it happened, my neighbor knocked on my door and said, Mr. Tom, would you mind if I stayed with you tonight? I said, sure, but I thought that's unusual. I mean, they lived right next door. Of course, they knew what was going to happen. Then we heard these guns going off. That was in the countryside, and we were in a little regional town. Then my neighbor said, I think we should get under the bed. Well, duh. I finally knew for sure that something was happening. Of course, it was the Tet Offensive. It was February 1968. The next morning, the neighborhood family came to me and asked me, would you accept people fleeing from the countryside? Because, the real people are always caught in the middle. The North Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese, they were all just rural people. They all needed shelter. So I thought, well, I have this place. So they all came in, close to 70 people, babies and everything. They were all packed into my little house. Then they said to me, Mr. Tom, we wondered if you could ask you to hide. And I said, well, sure, because the deal was if the North Vietnamese came in and saw me there with them, then we'd all be dead. I had a little water tank in the house and I could hide in it, a little cistern above the shower and toilet. It was a squat toilet. So I went up there and got in there. There was no water because there'd been a drought. It was very much a scene straight out of Carlos Castaneda. There was a little gecko lizard in there, and I had a whole conversation with it. That's why I have a gecko tattoo on my ankle. So there's that.
And were you scared going through that, or was this an adventure?
Yes, I was also young,
Yeah.
and I was really worried about the people because they could have been punished
Hmm.
for hanging out with me, even though they didn't know me. They came, like I mentioned,
Yeah.
the war affect, just like everything, the war itself affected people who were the most disenfranchised, the rural people, the poor people. There was a lot of class issues in Vietnam. And of course, this was a civil war, it was Vietnamese first. And then we had to put our big, nose into their affairs. So anyway, that was one experience in the 2 years I was there.
Was that the point in which you said to yourself you wanted to continue as an educator? I mean, you came back and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things happened, but when I came to San Francisco in the early 60s, I mean, obviously I had to pay the rent. And I did have a BA, so this is a little TMI. So I decided that teaching could be a way. I always like kids. My family has a lot of kids. I grew up with a lot of kids, and had some interests because of previous employment at a camp for the handicapped in special ed. So it all kind of came together. And I went for my master's at San Francisco State while working at camps for the handicapped and for the recreation center for the handicapped down there on the it's not the big highway. What is it called? The Great Highway. Big, great, tomato. And so that's where I got my credential and my basic education. And then when I went to Vietnam, I taught English as a second language at a local high school. I always say all those children and students now speak English with a New Jersey accent. You know, this is a dog. Uh, uh, when coming back to San Francisco, 1968, what am I going to do to pay the rent? Can't go for, don't look like a go-go dancer. I don't think I can do wealth management. So I continued my path towards teaching and started teaching for the district, the Unified, at the beginning of 69, right after I came back.
Just to rub everyone's nose in it, you mentioned in the book what you paid for rent for your apartment in San Francisco back
Oh,
then.
God.
How much was it?
It was, and I thought it was high. It was furnished. I had a boyfriend. We lived together. It was a one bedroom, big kitchen, a bathroom, part of 5 units in an old Victorian on 16th between Deviz and Market. $145.
A week?
I thought it was too much, and the guy never fixed the toilet either.
Yeah. No, a month, right? $145
Yeah,
a month.
he drank a lot, the landlord, which is, I don't, that I don't care about that. But he never would have a drink with me because I think he was a little, you know,
Yeah.
afraid. Maybe
Yeah.
I'd make a move. Hardly, but
Yeah. Well, we have a lot to cover. I certainly, want to bring up some of the politics and the bills that you've passed, the elected leaders that you've rubbed shoulders or not with. But
yeah, or rub something. I don't know. That's in the next book.
yeah. But let's briefly talk about also, your time as an activist, as an Outgate teacher, coming out. We've shared coming out stories here on the show all the time, and some people will share the first time that they thought or they knew that they're LGBTQ. But your coming
Yeah.
out was to the media and also with an activist hat on. So we can talk about that moment in which you fought
Yeah.
for non-discrimination policy, fought the school board, and
what-
yeah,
It was what they call a perfect storm. I mean, I always knew that I was gay in utero. You say I redecorated it while I was in utero. I mean, I know some people struggle, some people don't know. Look at your dreams. I always say, but I knew from the beginning, and people treated me like the other too. And obviously, I share that with a lot of LGBT and Q people and other people who feel different or are made to feel different. So it wasn't always pleasant, but you do develop tools and skills. And one of them was, being funny. And I did always have a sense of wanting to write situations. So personally, I couldn't articulate it, but I knew how I was being treated about being, perceived of being a sissy was not right. How do I write that? I never thought the words, but of course, escape was a good idea, and I did, and I escaped to San Francisco. And like I say, I cared a lot for my family and some of my friends, but it was bigger than them. It really was, and so San Francisco just had a lot of activism happening around me. And I think I had a proclivity towards that. So, I did work with the disabled, and there was, quite a lot wrong with society and how they dealt with the disabled. And then I went into special ed, and the special ed kids were treated horribly in those days by the school district. They were labeled forever, and their true potential was never. So, and then there was a women's movement happening. There was a civil rights movement happening. There was the anti-Vietnam movement, and percolating was the LGBT movement. And, as I found my feet in San Francisco, which basically meant, making friends, because friends are your family. I've always felt that, and I always feel so grateful for the friendships I've had and made, the gay men that I got to know, my sisters, all that. And I had a lot of straight friends who were in teaching. and just got sick of the homophobia on the playground, of course. But most of the name calling came in the faculty room, and that really sucked. And as a teacher, I just felt this is wrong, and I did get involved with some people of like thinking who were not really happy with the gay bar scene in the sense of it really discriminated against women, African American people, what you look like. I thought, if this is gay liberation, I don't feel it. Um, so I happened to see, by luck, a poster that advertised a meeting that said, to in effect, "Are you tired of the gay bars?" In those days, gay bars all over. I mean, New York, et cetera. The Stonewall. Some of those were mafia owned, and they didn't really give a shit about the clientele. And you had that terrible fire in the gay bar set on purpose in New Orleans. So all this is turning, and this flyer just struck a note with me, and I checked it out. I usually don't like things like that at all, and that turned out to be an organization that only lasted 1 year, called BAGEL, Bay Area Gay Liberation. But it really it was transformative. It was nutty, it was eccentric, and it always wasn't pleasant. But I learned a lot and informed me, and that's informed my political career too, the role as an activist. And I got to know wonderful lifelong friends, who are with us. I mean, I was just a lucky guy. So, and then Harvey happened, of course, and then the murders happened. I'm really just giving you snapshots, and all that tended to radicalize and motivate me to get involved in the way I've been involved. You know,
Mhm.
I even ran for office in 1979. I got about 5 votes or something, but it was a great experience. And it taught me that I think I'm going to go into comedy now. So I took a break from running for about, 15 years.
Well, let's stick with politics for a second, just because we talk with a lot of politicians who talk about how they deal with activists, and we talk about a lot of activists and their attitudes toward politicians. You, of course, have done both. When you became an elected official, did you still always see yourself as as an activist?
Well, again, I think it informs you.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's your history. And it's also an identity. Yeah, I do. But Harvey Milk was a good, role model in this sense, because his leadership came from the people. He listened to whoever his constituency was going to be, and it wasn't narrow. It was certainly queer, but it was also drawing and connecting the dots to other disenfranchised communities. Donald Trump has kind of trashed the meaning of populist, but it's not really what Donald Trump is. It's kind of what Harvey was. And I always felt I took that with me when I got elected, and I also felt that the way I was going to do legislation and help out was to be a conduit, to the constituency, the people who wanted things done around, especially social justice. So one story that's not in the book, when I got elected, especially to the Board of Soups, I mean, the AIDS crisis was raging, and there wasn't much being done about it in the way that we would have liked. And I'm going to pick on Kaiser now, but and Kaiser is quite different. But there was a number of demonstrations by ACT UP and others against Kaiser. They even said Kaiser equals death, because to be brief, they didn't have any standards of care for HIV, even though it was raging in San Francisco. And there was verified homophobia. And as soon as I got on the board, the activists and the ACT UP people that I knew said, we need relief. We need something here. This is ridiculous. And so I was able, through my office as supervisor, to get everybody in a room and lock the door. And we worked it out in a way that Kaiser eventually did a 180. Of course, nothing's ever perfect, but they came up with standards of care. And, frankly, a lot of it was a class thing. A lot of the people from Kaiser that we met with the angry activists, they might have been doctors, but they were removed. They were administrators, So I guess you could say I brought it home. And I've always been comfortable doing that.
There are lots of stories in the book that you tell about just being able to deal with the press and the media, and they were not kind to you, even local press. I mean, for example,
I have my obituary written like 80 years ago, to show you what they're, yeah.
Well, I mean, in particular, I wanted to bring out a story you told when you started the Speakers Bureau with Hank Wilson, and this bureau is you both of you going into classrooms and just talking about LGBTQ stuff, but so many people, and even closeted gay teachers or parents, or really did not want you to do this, and lots of journalists would write stuff about you being a pervert or talking about sexual
That's a compliment
positions
now,
and objects. I mean, this is just an example, but how did you, I guess, overcome that and just tell yourself, like, I'm not a monster, I'm not what they say I am, and just like you just kept going? Like, how did you do it?
I give a lot of credit to the friends I made, because once you are affirmed, once you make that hurdle, it doesn't go away. And I did have a circle of support. Now, part of the media's issue with me was not only being out, but how I was out. I'm not the butchest thing in the world. I don't think I need to worry about toxic masculinity too much. Every guy has his own issues, of course, gay or straight or femme or whatever. Sexism is sexism. But that made them uncomfortable. And then I leaned left, and that made them even more uncomfortable. So when I got elected, I was also doing comedy, and that made them uncomfortable. So they actually, I tell it in the book, they actually assigned a reporter to follow me to my different gigs, and then insinuate through headline and all that how inappropriate I was to be on the school board. So and I did have my struggles on the school board with other school board members. They didn't want me to touch certain things. Well, AIDS education, condoms in the school. Oh my God, they freaked out. The meetings went till 4 a.m. They sent the religious channel there. The interesting thing is a newspaper, I don't want to embarrass them, so I'll just tell you its initials, the San Francisco Chronicle, did everything they could about how inappropriate, even later on with domestic partners, it all was. But especially they hated the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts, as we know, were homophobic, and now look. But they could meet in the schools. And there's some act called the Civil something Act, Civil Service Act. Anyway, it allows even Nazis, if you wanted to use a school building after school, they couldn't deny you this. And my point was, we had a non-discrimination clause, and yet the teachers that we were paying, the Boy Scout leaders who were going in and teaching after and before, they would recruit during the school time, but then they would have the meetings after when the law actually allowed it. That would violated our non-discrimination clause, and that caused an enormous blowback, you can imagine. And it really it took a while, but I will say one thing for our community: there were straight friends of the political class. All right, so the political class knows each other, queer and straight, and in those days, the straight ones were trying to curry favor. We had become the issue du jour, right? So if you got Alice's endorsement or Harvey's endorsement, that didn't mean they followed through. From my mouth to God's ear. So when they went to the queer community and said, Tom is going too far, absolutely too far. The Boy Scouts, people loved them and all that stuff. The community stood by me. So it's always been sustenance from those around, even my family. Maybe not so much on the gay issue, the sophistication had to come later and all that. But I give a lot of credit to that background.
All of these issues and battles and opponents you've had over the years, what was your biggest challenge? Maybe the one that you really just, whether it was the biggest problem or your biggest difficulty in addressing it and battling it?
Well, I think my political perspective, gay being important, but my for better or for lack of term, my left lean, not so mainstream in how I thought about issues, women's issues, disabled issues, social justice issues. I mean, I was a knife. I was not sophisticated. I didn't really have an ideology. I used to make jokes about tight Trotsky butts and broad Stalinistic shoulders. That went over well. But, it was just that sense, not morally, but, what was right and what was wrong, just to be simplistic. I think it was a perfect storm of me landing here, seeing some interesting things happening socially and addressed. You didn't talk about it in New Jersey, but in San Francisco, there would be, the gay community, or, there'll be a women's march, so what I loved the most, and I had to live in Berkeley in the beginning for a couple of months, and everybody thought I was a student there. So I did identity theft. I pretended I was a student. Everybody thought I was. I had my little bag. And then there was the free speech movement. God was good. Wow, free fucking speech. I love it. And they did touch on the gay issue, not like, you really want, but enough. And Mario Savio and Bettina Apteger, and Mario was Italian. Oh my God. Anyway, it opened up a lot of doors. So again, osmosis,
Well, let's get into the politics. I mean, I really wanted to dive into maybe some juicy stuff. You added some juicy stuff in the book, but through your political career, you have served alongside some of the well-known elected leaders today, such as our current governor, Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
You guys served together, during your days as board of supervisor. You ran against Mayor Willie Brown, have certainly worked with, we mentioned Governor Schwarzenegger, lots of people, Nancy Pelosi, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Dianne Feinstein. My question is likability. I think what I get out of you sharing all these stories and, running against certain people or trying to pass a bill, the success that you had, I think you never really looked at it from the perspective that you had to be well liked, not, with your peers and not with people who might have voted against you or didn't support you. So I wanted to ask, I mean, it's the heart of, I guess you would say something like kiss my gay ass to the governor at the time if you didn't really care what people thought, what you thought. But yeah, did you really kind of go about things to be liked or not?
Well, not purposely. I always look for a connection, and if that happens, sometimes you can get around the attitudes. Now, I was on the board of SUPS for 14 years, and I had very strong likes and dislikes. And mostly it came from policy, but sometimes it came from personality. But I always did my best. So speaking of, all right, I'll let you wait for the I was going to tell you something, so now I'm going to tease you. Read the book, but sometimes there were rifts that were not really healed. Sometimes time went on. The only way I could put it in simplistic terms is using Dianne Feinstein. I think she's a good signature, because she's been around for so long. Dianne, especially around Harvey's time and all that, Dianne was not the do-gooder, but the establishment, just for the sake. And then we were the rebels. So there was a natural inborn conflict anyway. Now, conflict doesn't always have to be bad, because you're learning the ropes. You're learning a little something about your adversary, and hopefully you take that. And if you're stripped down to your core, there's things you can't change about yourself, and that's just how it is. And there's commitments, and that's just how it is. But after that, there are steps that you can take to deflect it, not necessarily to accommodate it, but to live with it. I'm an old hippie, so peaceful coexistence. And then the other thing, candidly, everybody likes a good fight. What you have to be careful is there are people who want you to fight with each other or with whoever the mayor is, and because of their benefit. So you have to be kind of clear about what you're thinking, and death penalty comes to mind.
Well, of folks who were on the other side of arguments with you, and maybe even some really heated disagreements, did any or many of them become friends, or at least friendly to you later on? Have any of them come to you later on and say, you know what, I was so wrong back then when I was opposing this right or that thing?
Yeah, well, the political class doesn't admit to anything unless I'm quitting my job because I want to be with my family. Your family hates you. And what about that accountant in the Caymans? Yeah, no, really. Sometimes there's a mellowing. It's hard to pin down, but unfortunately, and this happened a lot in Sacramento, there would be something really, causing a chasm. But then later on, someone might need a vote. So all of us, I always made the joke of, hi, how are you? And that's a nice tie. You burnt my house down and killed my kids and wife, but let's talk. The motivation was a collaboration that might be beneficial to one or two of the parties, but it didn't come out of, what a wonderful person. Now, my friend Eve, who worked with suicide prevention, she said, I always like happy endings, and I always like to think Romeo and Juliet lived happily ever after. So I'd like to think that maybe after a number of years, some people have mellowed about me. Although, I don't really think I've tempered anything. I'm older, but I don't think that the energy is subsided. And they do say that your brain, and it's still there, as you get older, the part that responds and to empathy grows. So supposedly when you're older, you have more empathy. And that's fine too. But, don't mess with things that we hold dear,
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that, we'd see you and Arnold Schwarzenegger teaming up to fight crime or something.
Arm wrestling, yeah. We could oil each other up, He used to not live in the governor's mansion. He lived in a non-union hotel across the street from the Capitol building. And, you could walk there in 2 minutes. And he would get the full regalia. His limo, the escort, go up the driveway, cross the street, pull into the driveway of the Hyatt, and then go to his penthouse. So
What about?
I tried to emulate that, but it didn't.
What about your thoughts on our where your relationship is or not? I don't know. Governor Gavin Newsom, I mean, you served
It,
alongside him
yeah,
as board of supervisor, and you were board president of the supervisors during that time. And so there was a great story in here about a clash on serving in committees and chairing committees, and it just didn't really seem like you were the best of
yeah.
friends. So
No, no,
yeah,
we weren't, and we clashed around policy a lot, and I think I still would. It's funny. I think if I know anybody well, I know our governor well. Uh, Not that that always sat, perfect. And believe it or not, um, and I think even he says this, um, I cut him more slack than others. Some people would wake up in the morning and their whole thing was get Newsom. I had other priorities, but I certainly had disagreement with him. Now, here's a little known fact, and in the book, there's one story. So, in or two stories, probably. No, three. When he was running for governor, I was a go-to guy for the press because I knew him, and people knew that we had riffs, and so they would call me to get criticism of Newsom. I didn't mind in the beginning because it was just my perspective, certain criticisms, things like that. So a magazine guy, right at the end of the interview, and I was critical. I said, "Well, I wish he had done it this way," or at the end says, "Well, are you going to vote for him?" To me, and there was only the Looney Tunes Republican, and I said, "Yeah, I believe in voting. I'm going to hold his feet to the fire, but I'm also going to hold my nose and I'm going to vote for him." So I got a text from him that said, "I'll take it, thank you." So I guess he read. So since then, we've had kind of a bromance. Every so often, we text each other. My husband says, "Oh, I think he has a crush." So that in a sense, and I'm still critical of him, but there you are. He's the governor.
yeah.
While we're talking politicians and names, wow, rate our current mayor of San Francisco, London Breed.
Yeah, politically, we're not on the same wavelength. I think she was schooled differently. I believe she's a smart woman. She certainly has a compelling backstory, but even with that, there are people who have similar backgrounds and similar stories, but the way they operate in terms of policy and politics is not the same as the current mayor. And the identity part, the first African American woman, I like that. I get into that. I think it's important, but it can't be the only thing. And me, I wish she was more progressive in her thinking and not so old school.
Here,
But just like with Gavin,
yeah.
she's the mayor. What can I say? So we'll see. How's that?
Here's a question I have. I mean, you ran for mayor, ran against Mayor Willie Brown, as I had mentioned, and that was he was running for a second term, and you ran as a right. What do they call it?
Write-in.
Yeah, write-in, and
Yeah,
you surprised a lot of people, especially what you'd referred to as the establishment or these established leaders, elected leaders. So the question is, if you had actually won, that race, we might not have seen a Mayor Ed Lee, maybe not even a Mayor London Breed. What do you think would have happened if you had won that race?
Well, I think if you personalize it, you have a different viewpoint, and you really, make names. Then right away you start thinking, well, I liked Ed Lee. What if there'd been no? You just you can't do the what if.
Mm-hmm.
That gets you nowhere. Well, I don't know. I think it would definitely have represented the people speaking. I don't want to aggrandize myself, but that was quite a movement that happened, and it nurtured me and sustained me. And I think things don't happen fast, but I do think we got Dean Preston and Chessa out of that. That the early parts of it, and had I been mayor, you can do a lot with I'm going to tell you something contradictory. You can do a lot with appointing people to commissions, and how you work with the supervisors could be different. One thing I would have changed is the strong mayor, not the person, but the office. Our charter says that the office of our mayor is very strong. And so therefore, checks and balances are not quite what they should be, especially in terms of budget. There's all kinds of fun things that happen with the budget out of any mayor's office. And I would have pushed for and used my platform for charter reform that would have reduced the role of the mayor as the final decision maker, arbiter, more sharing. Even though it would have been me. But see, for me, then I could have, the next term, if we got that through, I could have been ceremonial, have nice outfits, went to events. I wasn't threatened, in other words. And I still believe in that. And someday I hope it happens.
Well, one of my most favorite bills that you worked on and passed, and it's still around, Healthy San Francisco. And you tell a story about actually being kicked out of a restaurant because of that bill.
Oy vey, yeah. Well, the restaurateurs didn't like it. The coterie, I call them, and they have this restaurant association that's also national, and they're definitely right of center. And of course, here in San Francisco, we have a little worshiping going of the restaurant scene. Sadly, they're hurting now in a way that I don't think anybody wanted with the virus. However, they were very protective of their venues, and they did not like Healthy San Francisco because they had to chip in. And they sued us 3 times, lost every time. And one time, my husband-to-be and I stopped by a restaurant called Range. It basically happened because we were at an event that didn't have booze. So there's a lesson there somewhere, boys. And so I went in for a Manhattan, and I knew the restaurant had gotten a star or something. What do I know? And the owner came up. She was right out of the movie Frozen, and said to me, "Well, you're not welcome here. Get out." And I said, "Well, I want my drink." And she said no. She told the bartender to take the drink away, and gave me my money back. And I thought, who do you have to fuck to get a drink around here? So she kicked me out. I didn't make a scene because people don't know, and they make the wrong kind of assumptions. They didn't know the backstory, but it was humiliating, and it was awesome. It really pissed me off. And poor Carolus, my husband, was in the bathroom, so he didn't see anything, and he's looking for me. I'm out in the sidewalk, scowling. Later on, she was forced, I think, by the Restaurant Association to apologize. It was a pretty cold, removed. She didn't really have to. The damage was done.
Well, thank you for.
Of course, I had big fantasies of closing the restaurant down and all that, but.
Well, thank you for healthcare for all San Francisco's San Francisco's.
Yeah, see, it worked out. It worked out. Maybe she has it now.
Hey, Tom.
We've
got some questions from our viewers. Sister Roma asks, Tom, will you please tell your elevator joke?
Oh, I think when I met Roma, there was some speechifying, and I said, I got on the elevator and I met so-and-so, who knows, Dianne Feinstein, something. Dianne Feinstein was the elevator. And she said, going down? And I said, no, just talking. Thank you, Roma. Scandalous at the Commonwealth Club.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll put a disclaimer on this one. Someone else asked, Tom, what was the hardest part of writing your book?
putting my ass in the chair.
Just
You
focusing
know,
on it?
I'm a proud ADDer. You know, in my mind, there's a whole amusement park happening. So the focusing and the sitting down was the hardest thing. And then I got cornered by John Gollinger, God love him, and Tim Redmond. They said, we've been talking. I knew I was in trouble, but you keep talking about it and you're not doing it. How about if we sit down with you, transcribe it? And I mean, what a service. I mean, how lucky could anybody be? And so that got over that hump, but that was the hardest part.
I want to build on that because the very first sentence of your book, it's in your acknowledgments, and don't worry, I did read more than just the first page, but
That's fine. Don't worry about it.
the first sentence is really great. You say, writing something like this, one becomes self-involved and then delusional. Now, you use that to go on to talk about the other people who've done things and worked with you and helped you, but I also just kind of wonder, what is that like to go through your life and try to figure out what stories you want to share, how you want to share them, what they meant to you? What was that like emotionally to write the book?
Well, yeah, actually, you nailed it, because there were certain stories, and some of them, one of them dealt with my father, and I just had buried it, especially with the HIV/AIDS crisis. You just bury it. And so you have what people call ghost wounds. So I say, I want to tell this story, like the one about the Kaiser, maybe I'll tell that story. But then you start talking about the situation that we all lived through, instead of course, the people we lost. And boom, there you are. The waterworks start, or, so, but it was cathartic as well. Sometimes the stories were tested. It'd be something you might have told for a couple of years in your circle of friends, and sometimes they're responsive to questions you've been asked in the past, or maybe you pick up an idea from someone else's book. You think, I could explain that too. But mostly, since I was around during all the times that I've written about, I remember things very strongly and in a certain way. And I've seen other attempts to do that. And I thought, that's not 100% true, which, I understand, but that's been left out, or he's been left out, and I wanted to do my own take on things. So at least I'm on record, and then people can say, yeah, he's full of crap, or he's, but rather than keeping complaining about it, that determined some of the stories too.
You talked about, your dream actually was to be in showbiz.
Yeah.
And you became a politician and an activist, and a different road from even your stand-up,
Teaching, yeah.
being a stand-up comedian. But I think you actually did get your dream come true. You've been featured in some films and red carpety stuff.
I'm very, very grateful. There were missed opportunities, and as you get older, you live with all that. But I think I'm a lucky guy. I really, really do. And we'll see what happens with this crisis now. To me, it's almost, there are parallels to what happened with AIDS, of course, the scale. But when you have challenges like they call it Rona, the Rona, it reveals a lot about people, good and bad, or some are good and some are bad. And it's been kind of edifying that way, watching it all happen. And of course, being scared shitless.
Another viewer asks, Tom, do you think the United States will ever replace the corporate secret software voting systems with the open source vote counting systems you advocated as a supervisor?
I think that's Brent Turner. He's the guy who's most advocate.
That is correct.
Yes. Yeah. I see. Wait, Swami Tommy. It's yeah. I mean, I see the states doing it. What's a good indicator, even though it's weird? It's like Caligula, Trump going off on voting by mail, that shows it got their attention. That shows it's threatening, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always think there should be a paper trail. And God forbid, you know, in this November election, I don't know what shenanigans are going to be, you know, because, you know, there's such amorality in the part of the White House. So we're going to have to be on and, you know, be on alert. But I do, it's sensitizing people to the fact that we need open source voting and we need a paper trail. And, and hopefully it'll become a priority. I know it's going to be, but you know, how long is it going to take? We don't know yet.
Yeah. Does kind of bring up the question of, if you were in a room with Donald Trump, what would you shout at him?
Kiss my gay ass.
Oh,
Term of endearment.
that is really perfect. I guess that then we should definitely let people know they've got to get your book. I enjoyed it. I burned through the pages in 2 hours. I'm lucky that you sent me a copy, but people should get their hands on it. So how can they do that?
Well, there's two ways. There's two, you know, obviously we can't go the traditional way now of going to bookstores and doing those kind of readings, et cetera, or go to clubs. So we're doing everything online for the nonce. And we will have an audio recording, but we're going to wait a bit for the audio because I like to do it in a studio and you know have it be high quality. So you could go to SFBG, S as in Sam, F as in phony, no, F as in Frank, B as in Bay, G as in Guardian, SFBG.com, or you can go kiss my gay ass at
That's awesome. Yeah.
kissmygayass.com.
Kissmygayass.com. Get your copy right now.
Yeah, leave the gay in there for people who aren't sure or who want to be offended.
We got a couple minutes left.
Well,
Yeah, you want to have a question?
I mean, we've touched on this kind of obliquely a bit, but just personally, how are you doing right now? And being, are you totally staying at home? Are you okay? Are you handling it well?
Yes. You know, part of it is being older. You stick around a little more. You know, it's nice to be home with your honey because, you know, there's always a lot of demands, you know, and I'm flattered by them, you know, to speak or to please, can you attend this? Or I need your vote. And, you know, and I've been doing that for almost 50 years. So in a way, I'm not going to say nice because I don't have as much choice. I wish we had more choice, but you know, being home is okay. I do miss certain friends. I miss my granddaughters. I mean, you know, there's Skype and everything, but it's not the same. And I sit home too, being amazed that we're dealing with this and going through this. And especially the response from DC. You know, it's a life force. It drives me fucking crazy. So, you know, okay, but I am worried and I am scared for my friends and, you know, always hopeful, but it gives one pause to say the least, you know.
Well, I get the last question and Tom gets the last words. We got a couple minutes left. Obviously, the book is inspirational. You've been an inspiration, right, in the education community for students. So any words of encouragement, especially as we go through a year where we're not celebrating, we're not gathering, we won't have a pride, but basically what people get out of your book and, you know, what kind of hope we can continue to hold on to.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm thinking of this term. You know, every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. So hold on to that. I think we need to be. And Milk was good about this. It's not assimilating; it's how we assimilate. We really need to own we are different queer people, and that's good. Just like other cultures and peoples, because it contributes. to the fabric. So we never need to apologize for that. And we never need to become invisible. And we need to make sure that we're looking over our shoulder because, I mean, and Milk was good about this, as I mentioned, everything might seem okay now, but it may not be in the future. And, who could figure Trump and Pence and all those reprobates and the nibbling away of LGBT rights and the nibbling away of African American voter thing, So don't be complacent. Be yourself. By the way, have fun. Don't forget to have fun. When I was young, I was a disco bunny, I confess. And I would teach in the daytime. And then I would go to demonstrations at night. And then we would go dancing and disco. And then whatever happened. So that's my advice.
Love it. Tom Amiano, grab his book at kissmygayass.com. John.
And thank you for joining us, Tom. Thank you for watching and listening to this program. You can find out more programs we have coming up at commonwealthclub.org/online. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.